Hey Joe, how you doing?
Hey, Michelle. Good to be with you.
That's good to be with you. So we have week two of Jesus 2020, a sort of cross section of where um, our friend Jesus is in this election
Mm-hmm.
season, and we certainly have had an interesting week. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend text me and said, "So do you remember anything that happened politically this week other than the president's in the hospital?" And I was like, "I don't."
Oh,
So it kind of knocked me back on my pegs. How about you?
yeah. That's a good question. It's funny. All the things that happened politically have been tied to the president's diagnosis with COVID, right? The announcement of the Supreme Court justice nominee. Oh, well, he had COVID when he did that, and he had 150 people there without masks, and they were glad handing and carrying on. Um, and so I mean you're right, it's all been kind of subsumed in this thing. And so how do we understand the election, which was always ever about the welfare and the safety and the health of the people of this country? How do
Yeah.
we understand the election as anything else now?
So do you think that that's the role of politicians is for the health and safety of the people that vote for them, or is that a
Hmm.
part of it?
I think it should be. It
Yeah.
should be. In many ways, you are a caretaker. Like, if you believe in the servant leadership model, right?
Yeah.
You are responsible for the people who put you in a position of leadership.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think so.
I mean, if I was to describe what I do as a rector of a church, is that I'm here to love the people, to stand in for Jesus. And Jesus actually has a real clear statement about who he is very early on in his ministry. In Luke's gospel, he steps out and he gets baptized by John, and he goes off into the wilderness because, let's face facts. Now, I'm not saying that this has ever happened to me, but if the voice of God came down from the heavens and said, "This is my daughter, the beloved one, listen to her,"
Mm,
I think a reasonable thing would be like, I'm going to the desert for 40 days to try and like wrap my head around that, right?
mm.
So that's what happens. Jesus hears that, Jesus leaves and goes off for 40 days. And as we know, is tempted by the devil in many, many ways. And one of those is to do exactly what these lawn signs of, all the political power in the world could be his. And what is Jesus's response to that offer from the Satan?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he turns it down.
Yeah. So thanks, but
And
no
and
thanks, right?
yeah.
Thanks, but no thanks. I'm not there with that. And then he finally comes out of the desert, and this is where we catch up with Jesus. Let's see if we can get this up here. This is from the message, and it's a paraphrase as the message rolls. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read it since I think you read last week.
Sure.
So this is a paraphrase, and it's a little bit of an expansion, but this gives us a sense of place. He's been in the desert. He's gone to Nazareth, and he's gone into the temple. He came to Nazareth where he had been reared. As he always did on the Sabbath, he went to the meeting place, and when he stood up to read, he was handed the scroll of the prophet of Isaiah. Unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it was written, "God's Spirit is on me. He's chosen me to preach the message of good news to the poor, sent me to announce pardon to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened and battered free, to announce this is God's year to act." Jesus rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the assistant, and sat down. Every eye on the place was on him, intent. And then he started in. "You just heard scripture make history. It came true just now in this place." So if Jesus has a political platform, a set of
Mhm.
promises, He said what it is. He's very clearly stated that this has now come true in your thing, in your presence. Here I am. I'm got it. I'm going to announce good news to the troubled people. I'm going to set the captive free. I'm going to unburden people. I'm all that in a bag of chips, says Jesus here in Isaiah. And people in the gathering place, in the meeting house, who have been holding up Isaiah for quite a while, didn't really expect this young man to show up and say that. So that's what happened. That's his political platform. He's made his statement. How do you think that was heard by those nice people? They received it pretty well, if I remember correctly.
Right, initially, right?
Initially,
and,
yes.
and so I kind of love this passage, right? I love it because this is kind of Jesus's, it's his announcement speech, right? He's announcing his campaign for Son of God, his campaign for the Jubilee. And so he announces this thing, and everybody's like, yeah, you know, why don't you send me good news? I'm feeling poor today. I'm feeling poorly, as we say in Alabama.
I'll put this back up so you could like break it open here. All right.
Sure. He says, I'm feeling poorly. Give me some good news. I'm feeling imprisoned. What? Pardon me. And all those people can't see what it is I see. Why don't you give them sight so they can see what I see, and set me free of my burdens. Right. So I think people were, as people do in a political speech, they get fired up and ready to go, as a president like to say. And then it's interesting, they realized a little bit later on that he actually was not talking about them. And they got kind of upset about it, right?
They did indeed. They did indeed. Well, you hear that, and you can hear it in lots of ways. I mean, you can hear it as like, I need good news. I need to be set free. But it's the moment that it dawns upon them that Jesus is talking about a world in which everybody gets set free. And if everybody gets set free, there are going to be people who you don't like very well who get their fair portion. And you might not be very happy about that, because you were pretty convinced that son of a gun, Joe Hubbard, who's never done an honest day's work in his life, is going to get his comeuppance, because his very existence has been pushed upon me, poor, humble country preacher that I am. And that's not it. Jesus is saying, you're free, and you're free, and you're free. And now y'all have to live with that truth. And the people don't react well. What do the people do? If I remember correctly, they pretty much marched Jesus up to a cliff. They're going to chuck him all over that cliff.
Yeah, and it says that he escaped by passing through their midst. Yeah. But yeah, they were pretty upset, because we do that, don't we? We make the politicians' agenda all about us.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that it should be about everybody else, and that we are drawn into that call to serve everybody else. And that, it's not every politician that does that, but Jesus certainly does.
So we have these nice people in Alabama, and I think they're just sort of a straw man for this conversation. I mean, there's lots of people who view every politician that they've ever greeted in their life is probably the next, the person who taught them the best lesson of their life. You don't have to be a Jesus follower to say, man, I fell in love with this politician because he was speaking to my very heart about what was broken. And I'll give you a great example. I'm from Minnesota. As you all know, I'm actually a Canadian, but I lived in Minnesota long enough that I get to claim that heritage. And there's a great politician out of Minnesota. His name was Paul Wellstone. And actually the anniversary of his death is coming up upon us very quickly. He died in a plane crash. as he was running for, I believe, his third term in the United States Senate. And the thing that people don't remember about Paul Wellstone is that he voted to support the Defense of Marriage Act. And at the time, I was like, well, politicians, man, I like that guy, huh? Can't believe he's doing that. Because the Defense of Marriage Act was to have marriage be between one man and one woman. And, you know, the needle has shifted hard on that. But I had friends of mine who were from the GLBTQ community who worked really hard to get Paul Wellstone elected, and they felt betrayed by this guy, right? So it's a good example of somebody, Paul Wellstone, thoughtful, articulate, wonderful man, was agreed with me on so much. He was my guy, and he didn't see my ability to get married to the person that I love as worthy of defending. That's a heartbreaking truth. So politicians let us down. So we have this group of people who are like, I've been let down by so many politicians. Man, you would think that I'd be ready to run Jesus as a candidate, but I suspect Jesus would just tick me off as a candidate at times. And we see this in this gospel piece, right? So what is this revolutionary story of releasing the captives, of seeing true and complete freedom, of good news to a broken world? How do we live into that as a people? And of course we want to make it about politics, because that's what fixes things, right? Politics fixes things. But there's a different call out here. And how do we step into that deeper call?
And that's a really good question, Michelle. You know, part of, and again, this isn't about me. You know, the preachers always have to remind themselves that, right?
It's always about me.
But part of my journey and my call away from politics, I got into politics thinking that I could set things right for folks for whom things had never been right.
Yeah.
And I realized in my short time in politics that change only lasts in a political system for a definite period of time, right? It'll last till the next election cycle. It might only last till the next vote of a legislative body, right? That change is very temporal in the political system. What Jesus is proposing here is a complete reordering of the way we live our life in this world. He's proposing a change that is not conditional upon the whims or the wishes of a politician or a political party. He's proposing a change that is permanent, a reordering of the world in the dream of God is what he's proposing. And you know, he even says, you know, in the message he says, this is God's year to act. And so he puts that agency on God. And I wonder if that's what frustrated the folks in Nazareth that day.
Well, you know, I wonder too about, we have these people in a system that is an oppressive system. There is a foreign occupying power pushing its will down on these people to the point where they're grinding out a life of poverty and feeling hopeless, and they want good news. And I think the people who've been supporting the political systems, not just this round, but people who have been supporting Donald Trump, people who are supporting Joe Biden this year, they're seen as that they're being oppressed by the people of power, and they want a new regime in. And this sort of snapping back and forth between these two power dynamics is really problematic. Now, I'm not equating them. I'm saying that people's feeling is equal. I'm You know, y'all can argue with us one-on-one about who the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, or however you want to put it, the evil of two lessers or the lesser of two evils. I'm not advocating for one side or the other. What I'm saying is it seems like that same whipsaw of it and of desperation. And if we do believe that the year of Jubilee is at hand, what do we as believers, of people of the way, do to bring that about? And that's lifelong questions. That's not just this year. I mean, I take that as a very metaphoric year of a hope. I mean, Jubilee is a very specific concept of, you know, once in a lifetime of forgiving all debts. We're not there. What would this world be like if we were? My Native friends would say, that's great. Just give us back everything. The doctrine, you want to renounce the doctrine of discovery, give us back all your land, you know?
Sure.
And we're not ready to do that. So.
We're not ready for a lot of things, no.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, and I think about this, and I've actually, we started, I think we're talking about Donald Trump a little bit and the COVID. You know, one president I've been thinking a lot of this past week is FDR. And I've been thinking about how his polio in many ways defined his relationship with the American public. Here was a president who was chronically ill and had to rely on others to lead. And you know, what you're describing in kind of Jesus's campaign for God's dream is this world in which the political systems are undercut in powerful ways. And so I'm thinking about how that was the case with FDR. You know, the nation was always wondering, well, is he going to be strong enough to lead us through? And then World War II happens, and he, you know, we go through a depression, we go through a world war. And again, I don't want to be talking about karma here, right? But because I don't think it's about that necessarily. Some could disagree with me. What I've seen over the last week is a humbling of authority in this country. And I've seen the authority in this country resisting that humbling at every turn. And I'm wondering what is that all about? And what does that say for us as Christians who are engaging in this political process? I mean, Ashley and I are sending in our absentee ballots for Alabama. You know, those votes will be canceled, but hey, but what does it mean for us to participate in a process that does not promise permanent change?
It's an interesting thing. I would profoundly disagree with you about FDR, because I think that one of the things about FDR was the basis. Like, we have this nostalgic view of our presidential relationship with the media, right? And the media is like worlds away from all of that. But you know, people didn't know FDR was hurt. People didn't know that he was in a wheelchair. It was a very well-kept secret, or everybody, it wasn't even a secret. It's just people all bought into it. Like, all our leader needs to not look vulnerable. Why is that? Why is that? What is that about leadership? Like, I myself, and maybe it's because I'm a flawed leader, I like some flaws. I like brokenness. I remember when I first started talking about going in the ordination process, a priest I knew, and I had a conversation, and I had told him long ago that I was in recovery for my alcoholism, my drug addiction. And he said, "Oh, good for you. You're pre-broken." Thank you, Howard. But I think that there's something about walking through something.
Yeah.
Like FDR knew what it was like to feel weakened in body. And did that make him a better president? Well, I'll leave that to the historians. Donald Trump being sick with COVID, is that going to help him have more understanding of what it's like to have this very problematic disease? Maybe. I think time will tell. It's um, I don't want to profit from bad speaking ill of anyone, especially someone who's sick. But his unwillingness to stay in his hospital bed strikes me as very, very interesting about a determination to look strong in the face of this weakness. And I think a case could be made that FDR did the same thing. He didn't want people to know that polio had affected him so much that mostly he needed help walking or he needed to be in a wheelchair. But what a leader, what a mind. Woodrow Wilson was profoundly ill with the flu in 1918. And he was also probably profoundly ill with dementia near the end of his life. And the case could be made that he didn't admit to it, so someone else ran the show. We don't want our leaders to be flawed. And Jesus is a pretty flawed leader. And I guess I like my leaders flawed is, to paraphrase, right? So I think this is an interesting conversation to think about the revolutionary nature of Jesus, and is indeed this a long-term staying power? And I'm painfully aware we're out of time and we came up with no answers again. Just a whole lot of questions, and hopefully it's engendering a conversation with anyone who might be watching this. And I hope that if people do have questions or comments, or like, you said this, but then you immediately skated off to something else, and I really want you to talk about X, send us an email. Send Joe an email. Don't send me an email. I'm flawed and broken. I won't read it. He will. But send Joe Hubbard an email at stmarks.net, and we will continue to slog through election season and Jesus 2020. You get the last word. You got anything else that you want to say about any of this?
I'll say that I do pray for the president, and I'll say that, whatever comes of this, and it's terrifying. I mean,
Yep.
What's happening right now is terrifying for me. And I wonder if it's not also a call on us as people of a country to be humbled as well, to recognize our vulnerabilities, which we close our eyes to, right? COVID was something out there, right? For so many of us, it was something out there that didn't affect us. I mean, my father got it, and that was terrifying. I can tell you, for many people, it was not something out there.
Mhm.
And so now, in a way, we are all having to grapple this thing. And I think it's important that we do. I think it's important that we don't hide from it, that we don't pretend like this is not a threat, that this is not an issue, because it affects us all. And we're seeing that in profound ways. And I think as we move forward as a people, the way that we do that will define how we emerge from this pandemic. And I hope that as Christians, as followers of the Jesus way, we can model a way to do that might be different from the way that everybody else might be trying to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And now I feel obligated to say that, yeah, I'm praying for the president and the first lady and all the people who've been infected by COVID. And we're up to 35 million worldwide. This is a serious long-term, we're not sure what it all means, disease. And we need to be people of care in this and continue to move forward. So we'll continue this conversation next week. Thank you for spending a little time with me. I hope that we didn't say anything so seditious that this is going to come back to bite us, but there you go. It's kind of a free form conversation, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next week.
Same, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.